Good to see all kinds of faces out in the chat room tonight. Welcome to another edition of Paranormal Fireside Chats with the Naked Bigfoot. Want to pause right there. I'm actually thinking about changing the name of this again to WTF. WTF with the Naked Bigfoot. You guys let me know in the comments below what you think about that. Okay. Sorry, I did my medication routine early tonight, and the eye drops I put in my eyes at night have really fucked up my eyes majorly. So you have to bear with me. Yeah, Chris, I am serious weighing on calling it WTF with the Naked Bigfoot. um, which, because most of my stories cause people to say, "What the fuck?" So I figured it'd be kind of cool to name it that. Okay, before we begin, I have to do the disclaimers. The opinions and thoughts expressed by your humble host, the Naked Bigfoot, are his and his alone. I am not here to persuade, dissuade, or change any belief systems that you may hold dear. This channel is meant to inform and entertain. But if you leave from watching one of my shows with an open mind and a desire to go forth and learn more about the strange and incredibly odd world that we live in, I consider my show and my job a success. Also, if there's anybody out there who's offended by foul language, I let there be a warning. This show will contain a great deal of foul language at some point, especially tonight's show. We'll have a great deal of foul language at some point. Namely, the F-bomb. I like to say fuck a lot. See, I just said it just there. So if you are not the type of person who can overlook the occasional expletive, or if you have small children that you don't wish to expose to foul words, please ask them to leave, or maybe this channel is not for you in general. I hope it is, and I hope you stick around, and I hope you chase your little kid out of the room so you can watch it. We also play a drinking game on my channel. Every time you hear me say, "That's a story for another day," or some effects of where and you'll hear me say it a lot tonight. That's a story for another day. Please take a drink of your adult beverage, or if you do not drink adult beverages, your tea, your water, or liquid of choice. And as always, do not drink and drive. You will, if you are drinking adult beverages, considering how many times I usually say that's a story for another day, you will be drunk by the end of the episode tonight. Alrighty. Oh, I want to give one more disclaimer. I strongly advise people to watch and rewatch tonight's episode. As some may or may not know, and I'll go into a little bit more detail later on this, but I just want to give everybody a heads up now. Expect you pick up on some EVPs on tonight's broadcast. If anybody has any meters or ghost hunting equipment, feel free to plug it in or play it during the time and replay this episode. Why, you may ask, because we are also joined by somebody who I would truly shit my pants if she would appear right in front of the screen tonight. That being my quote unquote spirit guide, my little ghost girl that's been with me my entire life. She is with me tonight. She is in the room tonight. She is making herself be known out the peripheral of my vision. I see her in the peripheral of my vision as I turn left and right. Um, she's here with us tonight. Whenever I do talk about this particular subject, which is that of spirit guides and spiritual companions, she does make herself known. She is. I'm not going to say she's offended by the conversation, by me talking about her. But she is incredibly guarded and has been known to be incredibly protective of me. And if she's that I am being slighted or she's being slighted, or if I'm the one doing, she has, especially when it comes to electronic devices, she's quite good at fucking with electronic devices, um, distorting voices, images, creating ghost images of my face, creating ghost images of herself on the screen. So, just to give everybody the heads up, as we get deeper into the conversation tonight, that expect weird shit, because weird shit more than likely is going to happen tonight. It's one of the 4 subjects I talk about that weird shit always happens when I talk about them. This being the number 1 subject. So, alrighty, let's get into tonight's topic. As everyone saw in the description, I will be talking about spirit guides. Now, this is a subject that, if anybody's interested in it, you may want to go and watch an episode. If you go on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is Voodoo3, or Mike the Naked Bigfoot, if you search it that way. If you don't follow me, or if you want to look me up, I have pinned to my profile a link to The Truth About Beer, and that to an episode that I was a guest on, where they invited me on to talk about spirit guides, and we went into some crazy amount of detail, and it was a fun, and it was also a fucking really weird night as well. Um, uh, Things were all will be revealed. That kind of shit was happening that night. But it was a very fun time with Keith and Papa Joey that night. Had a great time talking about it. Um, didn't get off subject too many times, but that's a story for another day. So if you want to hear my previous conversation about spirit guides, because I'll guarantee you there's going to be shit when I talk about it that I'm going to forget to talk about again. That if you watch that episode, The Truth About Beer, it'll fill in some of the details if I forget about it. So you'll have to forgive me there. Alrighty. Back to the show. Okay. Let me define, from my experience and my research, what a spirit guide is off the bat. A spirit guide is not a guardian angel. That's the first thing that most people in modern times, in the last 10 or 20 years, associate with a spirit guide. They always equate a spirit guide with a guardian angel. And I'm not going to talk about guardian angels today. I'm not going to talk about angels. I have an episode here on my channel about angels and demons. And if you want to hear what I think about angels and demons, I strongly encourage you to watch that episode. It will more than likely either enlighten you or offend you. It's always one of the two. Never the two shall meet between. I have very strong opinions about this stuff, and I don't mind sharing them. But that's not what tonight's focus is on. And tonight's focus is on spirit guides, not angels and demons. Okay. A spirit guide is a spirit, just like the name suggests. It is not And you've heard me describe in previous episodes here, where I've talked about the different types of spirits. There's the once human, which are your typical ghost, the non-human, um, which are, your dimensional spirits, um, and the unhuman, which are more akin to elementals and nature spirits and such, that don't even have a tinge of humanity about them. Um, Non-human spirits can pick up human and mortal traits and display them, but unhuman spirits cannot. They're incapable of it. They are completely alien in their thought patterns, actions, and emotions. Now, spirit guides typically fall into the non-human category. Um, they are not the ghosts of your ancestors. They're not the ghosts of your neighbors or your mother or anything. Spirit guides usually take the form as a force of nature, and when I say as a force of nature and as an aspect of nature, they appear as an animal, which is a lot of people who study Native American lore um, know, usually equate a spirit guide with an animal, a spirit animal, or a guiding animal spirit with an animal. But there are cases of non-human spirit guides or non-human spirits appearing, um, that assume the form, um, a human form, a human-like form. Um, a spirit guide, from my studies and from my observations, can be summoned, can be requested, and there is just a myriad of rituals in all cultures, and I do mean all cultures across the world, that enable you to summon forth a guiding spirit. Um, Usually, it's a very temporary arrangement, no more than a few days, sometimes a year. Then you have the very rare occurrences, to where you get a spirit guide that was not summoned, is drawn to you for one reason or another. And usually these spirit guides stick with you your entire life. They can appear as animals. They can also appear as human beings. In my case, when I was very young, um, I met my spirit guide for the first time uh, when I was playing. And remember, I'm a mountain child. You got to remember that. So we played in the woods and a lot every day. We didn't have TV for the most part, not radio for the most part. So we had to find entertainment for ourselves. And usually it was in the woods, exploring the woods, or fucking around the creek or something, or blowing up a hornet's nest or something. Mountain kids are destructive when they're bored. Trust me, but that's a story for another day. Um, and it was right after some really bad storms had gone across the mountain, rainstorms, and the creeks were. And I remember mountain creeks are not your typical creek; they're like fucking rivers. And in this case, flash floods were very, very common. And usually it was the children that got caught in the flash floods because they'd be dicking around the bridges. And when I said bridges, we're not talking about your typical bridge. We're talking about something that was made for you to walk across. It wasn't meant for vehicles to walk across or anything. It was made for you to walk across it. For hunters, gatherers, moonshiners, people like that, that crossed the creeks that were usually made from, gathered stone and pieces of wood and logs. And I was told not to go down to the creek, because I'd probably get washed away. Because usually, we always every year, there was always a story of, one or two kids being washed away and found dead later from a flash flood. From the water coming down out of the mountains after it didn't even have to be a strong thunderstorm or a rainstorm. It just had to be a good amount of rain that would hit the top of the mountain. And it could be a bright sunny day, but at the top of the mountain it was a storm, and then the rain would come, then the water would rush down, and if you were near the creek, um, you'd get washed away and you would die. Well, I went down to the creek. I was going towards the creek when I heard a voice say, "Hey, hey." It was a little girl's voice, a very young girl's voice, um, saying, "Hey." And I turned around, and I was almost to the creek. And she said, "Come play with me." I turned around. I didn't see anything, but I heard a voice say, "Come play with me." So I turned around in a big circle because when you're a child, you don't get freaked out much, especially when you grow up in the woods like I did. Very little freaks you out. At that time, very little freaked me out. Trust me, when I started learning what lived out there in the fucking woods, you experience the innocence of youth is amazing because you're the bravest soul when you're young until experience that comes with education, um, and information makes you can turn you from the bravest soul to the biggest coward very quickly and make you absolutely scared of everything. And I hadn't reached the scared of everything point in my life. It was still a couple of years later before that shit started happening. Um, but that's a story for another day. And I kept turning around and hearing, "Come play with me," over and over again. And I finally saw her, a little girl, black hair, long black hair, white dress, black shoes, um, pale skin. And what was really interesting about her, which I'll never forget, is when I first saw her, she just popped out of nowhere behind me when I was turning around in circles. About the third circle of me turning around looking for the voice, she was waiting there behind me. Um, and she had no eyes at all. That didn't, I wasn't scared then. Like I said, I was that young, brave soul at the time. I wasn't scared at all. Um, and I asked her, who are you? And her reply was, "I'm a friend." And I asked her, what the hell was she doing on the property? Picked that up from my grandfather and my grandmother, who were famous for saying that to strangers that would come onto the property. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" So as a kid, I heard it enough growing up to where I would immediately say that to any stranger that came up on the property. Um, Said that to some missionaries one time. They came on the property, and I hadn't realized my grandfather was behind me with his shotgun when I said that, but the missionaries ran like hell back down the mountainside. That was a lot of fun, but that's a story for another day. We don't take kindly to strangers on our property. Okay, serious time again. Just a quick pause. Uh, I just heard somebody say, "Really now?" There's nobody upstairs with me right now. Um, yeah, she has started. She has begun. Um, and she looked at me and just repeated, "Come play with me." So I walked over, being a little asshole that I was. And that's when I heard, the sound of wood breaking and rocks rolling, and I whirled back around. And the stream had a flash flood was happening right behind me across the bridge. That little wooden plank bridge that we had there um, had happened. And I had realized, thinking back on that she had saved my life for the first time. She kept me from going down there and getting washed down the creek and more than likely dying. And she kept me from doing that. When I turned back around from, seeing this huge wall of water that had washed away the bridge and the trail, she was gone. Except for she wasn't completely gone. Where she had been standing at, um, there were two little footprints there. Two little indentations where somebody had been standing there. That was all that was left. And I could smell very faintly the smell of jessamine. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. It's usually something you find in the mountains and in the deep south. We call it a weed now, but a lot of people plant it in their yards. Jessamine is a type of jasmine, wild jasmine. It's been tamed, of course, now. People use it in landscaping now. Um, but it has a very distinct. Um, it's like a blend of honeysuckle and night jasmine. If you ever are familiar with that scent, I hope one day you are. Um, I caught a faint whiff of that when I stood over top her and looked where the footprints were. Well, of course, after that, I ran my ass back up the hillside and went back home and told everybody about what had happened on the bridge and about the washing out of the bridge and everything down there. And of course, I had to hear a lecture from every member of my family and every cousin and every fucking aunt and uncle and all my grandparents and parents. They all had to tell me how stupid I was for doing that and forbid me to go back in the woods for like ever, which of course I would go back into the woods later on behind their backs. But that was my first encounter with her, but not my last. As I grew up, at first I thought, um, you know, I thought she was an imaginary friend when I was a kid because she would appear when I was with my cousins or something playing tag in the woods or something. She'd pop in and out around the trees and around the trails and would walk out and would disappear. I started having dreams of her. But the dreams were interesting. She was a lot more talkative and still is a lot more talkative when I dream. Um, she would tell me stories in my dreams when I was younger, um, and ask me questions about my life. And somehow the stories always revolved around the questions that she would ask me about my life. I had a feeling that she was trying to teach me more about myself at the time. Um, she would always appear when there was a potential for danger, whether it be a paranormal danger. Remember, this is when I was still on the mountainside. Whether it was something paranormal, whether it was something that was happening in the natural wood, uh, something as simple as about to step onto a yellow jacket nest or something, she would appear. And I realized that when she would appear physically in the daytime in front of me, that it was a warning. It was something was about to happen that I needed to be about to happen in the area that I was standing in, and I had to be attentive of it around me. Um, I told my grandmother, my great granny Voodoo, which people hear me talk about her. That's what I called her. That's what I call her now, Great Granny Voodoo. Her actual name was Ola Sims, Granny Sims, and then there was Granny Daisy and Granny Dorothy uh, in my family. And I told all of them. You have to remember my grandmothers and my grandmothers and great grandmothers were the witch women of the woods, of the mountainside. They were the healers. They were practiced their form of folk magic up in the woods. And I told them about her, about what I'd seen when I felt comfortable enough to talk about her. And when I started telling them about her, she appeared in front of me again, off to the side behind them. And that's the first time she ever spoke in a voice that was not a little girl's. She said no, but it was the sound of it was the voice of an incredibly old woman, um, raspy, but incredibly demanding. Her voice echoed without being loud. Um, and it felt physical, that voice did when she spoke to me. But she was indicating that this is not a subject I needed to be discussing with them. And, my great granny Voodoo, who realized something was in the room at the time with us when I was telling him this, and she sensed her on some level. She sensed my little eyeless girl. She put her hand on my face and told me to stop talking. Something's not liking this. Stop talking. Um, and she shut me down. And that's when my little eyeless girl vanished. But my granny wanted me to never talk about it with her ever again. That was the first time that I realized that I actually scared my family, that I scared members of my family when I started talking about her. Um, and I realized that she was real and was not something that I created from my imagination, that she was something that was actually real, um, spiritual, but real. And that she scared members of my family. She scared members of my family who are aware of the preternatural and the supernatural up there in the mountains. And they felt it was best something that I don't bring up or talk about because they were generally afraid that, something might happen. Not to me, but to them. I have never felt threatened by her in the least. Um, I have been alarmed by her with some of the reactions that she's had over the years. But let's skip ahead a little bit. Once I left the mountainside, and I was enrolled in school around normal folk who weren't born and raised in the mountains in the state of Virginia. I was in high school and I had a bad time. I had a really, really bad time adjusting in high school. Um, it was it's hard for uh, just to describe to you. One of my teachers, she was my creative writing teacher, Rachel something. I can't think of her full name. I want to talk about her many years ago. She she was my first period teacher, and she introduced me to the classroom for the very first time. Um, and she had them tell the class my name and about myself a little bit, and I realized that I was the only child who I did not have a typical childhood experience growing up educated in the mountains, deep in the mountains, as everybody else in the room was around me. Um, and it was sad. I felt alone, and it was for the very first time that I felt depressed. And it went on for the course of a year. The depression just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and I wouldn't talk about it with my family. Um, I had not seen my little spirit girl for quite some time after we left the mountains. Um, and I actually was going to kill myself. I had some horrible depression. I wasn't bullied, but I wasn't befriended by any of the kids in the school. I was isolated alone, and that's not something, it's good, especially for, you know, at that age when the hormones are going strong and your brain is developing, you know. And I actually was going to shoot myself on the football field, and I had taken my grandfather's gun, which he had given to my father, and I was going to blow my brains out all across the football field. Um, and I put the gun up to my head, and it was a 22. I know it wasn't a high caliber. Well, at the time, what the fuck did I know? A gun was a gun, and I was gonna pull the trigger. And that's when I felt something like electricity with the hand that was holding the 22 revolver up to my head. And it felt like electricity shooting up my arm. And I was holding it with my right hand, right up against my temple. I was about to pull the trigger, and I had my eyes wide open. Because I was taught many years ago that you always die with your eyes open, never die with your eyes closed. But that's a story for another day. You guys would like that story, the explanation behind that. And I realized, I took my hand down with the gun. As I brought my hand down, there was another hand on my hand. And I looked around and I saw that it was my little girl. She made another appearance. This time she spoke in a different voice. It wasn't the old lady's voice and it wasn't the child's voice. It was the voice of a middle-aged woman, a middle-aged motherly voice. And she just said, "No, this is not the time. This is not your time." And the whole time, I just felt this electricity just shooting up my arm the entire time. Um, I swear, at the time I had a full head of hair, and it was coal black. Um, and I swear I could hear static electricity popping on my hair as the wind blew my hair around out there. So the wind started to blow pretty hard. And I dropped the gun. And for the very first time ever, I saw her smile, and she disappeared once I dropped the gun. I ended up telling my parents what I was going to do. Um, they didn't put, I mean, you have to remember the times in which we were in. So there was really, and my upbringing, their upbringing. Um, they didn't take me to a doctor or get me therapy or anything. But they insisted that I talked with them every night when I would come home from school, and insisted that they actually went and told uh, my mother did. She shared what had happened on the football field with a couple of my teachers that she had gotten to know quite well. And those teachers took me under their wing. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I didn't know my mother had talked to them. And they helped guide me through the rest of my high school. They watched over me at the time. Okay, long story short, I just had to share that story. That's when she reappeared back in my life after leaving the mountains and going to a civilized high school with civilization. And one of my another brush again with death again. Um, okay, it's gotten really fucking cold in here right now, just to let everybody know. Again, if anybody's got their ghost equipment or hear anything or see anything tonight, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Or you can DM me through Twitter with it. I would love to hear about it. But I've got goosebumps. It's gotten really, really cold in the room. And this room is usually fucking burning hot. I do have a fan going. But this room is usually burning hot, but it's gotten very cold, especially when I start telling that story about the football field. The football field suicide attempt. Okay. Back to spirit guides. Again, let me pause there and say this is my experience. At the time, I still didn't know what I was dealing with. When I was, got older, and of course, when I went to high school, and I thought back on, I thought, again, I'm talking about an imaginary friend. But when she appeared on the football field that day, I realized that she was more than an imaginary friend. She was something that was very, very real. But again, I was, was encouraged not to talk about it by by the elders of my family. So it's not something I talked about how it ended. So, but I realized then that all the times that she'd protected me as a child, that she was here now as an adolescent trying to protect me still and trying to guide me away from death. Um, But this time I felt like she was being less of a stop sign and more interactive with me. She actually touched me. And that's up to that point, she had never, ever in the past had ever reached out to touch me before. She'd always keep a good distance between me and her and never try to make physical contact with me. Um, Now, when she would get close, she'd brush her mouth against my ear or something to whisper something. Usually a monosyllabic word, something like no or yes, if something was going on. But in this case, this is a case of a permanent, non-human spirit that felt, I think, a sort of kinship with me. Um, that our energies were compatible. And that somewhere out there on the spiritual plane of existence, this little spirit was. Just going to pause in the story to tell us. This little spirit, again, I believe, felt a kinship with me. Um, I believe that I keep saying she, but I don't think it has a sex. It appears as a little girl because it wants to appear as a little girl, but it's not a female spirit whatsoever. Um, I don't think there's a gender really to assign to it. My, doesn't that sound awfully politically correct? But this shit happened before, this type of political correctness became a thing. I get the distinct impression that she was lonely, um, that there was something missing in itself, that she was. I need to stop calling her it, because I usually get dirty looks when I refer to her as an it. Um, so I'll keep referring to her as a she and not be an asshole and say it too often. Um, she, I think she feels complete with me. And she feels like she's making me complete, um, by existing in my life. That's just the feeling that I get, how that feeling translates to me whenever she's around. Um, it's not as much a sadness as it is a longing, um, for a companion. Because I believe she was alone in the great spiritual plane, that she was alone. And somewhere inside of me, she felt that empty spot in me, and felt again, a sort of kinship with me, and came out of the ethers around me to help me and to manifest herself with me, in front of me, um, and to be a part of my life, and to experience my life. Well, after the football incident, let's get back on track. After the football incident, um, she became more active in my life, especially, again, let's talk about dreams again. She became a lot more active in my dreams. Um, I could ask her questions. She would not answer them all the time with words. And this is some of the first times that when I slept, I began to slip into not a dream world, but a spiritual world, um, that always mimicked the house that we were in. I'm gonna say mimic. Wasn't an exact representation of the house. It could be the entire house, but the house would be without walls. Um, it would not be ever be complete. And she would always be there, and I would, leave my bed and walk with her. Again, she would not always answer with words. She would answer with pictures, or with symbols of things like snakes or fire or lightning or rain, to answer my questions. Um, and I would have to interpret them the best way I could. Now, if I interpret them in a way that was not correct, that dream would repeat itself the next night, and the same thing would go over again because she realized I didn't understand what she was trying to say to me the first time around. Because I think that with a lot of non-human spirits, um, they have a hard time communicating with us. As mortal physical beings in our dimension, they have a hard time communicating with us. So they try to find many ways to communicate with us. And I think this is true with all spirit guides and spirit animals in general, that they communicate with us the best way they can. And it's usually not through direct, verbal communication. Sometimes it is, but it's not, very rarely complete sentences or coherent sentences. It's usually done through symbols, and that's a pattern you'll see a lot in a lot of different cultures and religions that talk about spirit guides and spirit animals and spiritual companions, that you can't sit down and just have a conversation with them. They don't have the ability to communicate with you like that. And we don't have, being these physically limited mortal people that we are, we don't have the ability to completely communicate with them either. And they observe us to understand us, and they learn how to communicate with us by observing us. And we learn how to communicate with them by observing them and the things they wish to show us. Now, one of the more interesting stories with my spirit guide, my spirit companion, um, is that when I went on my quest to find myself after leaving high school and a couple of years of college under my belt, I went back to college later, but that's a story for another day. I decided to tour the United States and Canada and Mexico, South America. I spent a few weeks in Japan. Um, Went to all 50 states. Did all kinds of crazy shit in all of them. But I began my great paranormal adventure where I started to investigate and explore all things paranormal and preternatural, as I was trying to find myself at the same time, find the reason for my existence. She approved of that course of action because whenever we're going into a dangerous situation or a potentially dangerous situation, whether it be something supernatural or paranormal or something from the mortal world with mortal human beings and physical human beings, she would appear before me. Um, Still didn't understand what she was at the time, um, but she would always guide me away from the danger or stand between me and the danger. She wouldn't let the bad things of the world reach out to touch me. I'm not saying that they couldn't reach out and touch me, but I think to them, to some of the stuff that I experienced, she was a lot more scarier to them than she was to me. She never let me see that scary face, but I think she showed that scary face to a lot of other spiritual critters that are out there, um, to essentially tell them to back the fuck off. Um, that I was pretty much hers and her property, that they couldn't have me. They couldn't hurt me, which I always found reassuring. So I always thought of her like a little ghost. I always thought of her as a ghost. She never had eyes. And you have to remember, in the spiritual world, now there's the old saying, the eyes are the window to the soul. That is incredibly true. Um, that is incredibly true because things that don't have eyes generally don't have a soul. They may be comprised purely of spiritual energy, or if you want to look at it like this, they are souls. They are a soul. Their composition is the same energy that comprises a soul. And just to talk about angels and demons again, usually when you hear about angels and demons being described in Old Testament, they didn't have eyes per se. They would always have, fire or flames where the eyes should be at. Because you remember angels and demons, they were not human whatsoever. They were created by God. Um, and they were the stuff of souls. They were composed of the same energy that makes up a soul. So they essentially were souls with, souls. So things that are souls don't have eyes. They don't have access to the soul when they are the soul. We as human beings have eyes, and the eyes are, of course, reflect our soul within them. They reflect they are. That's when I see people who don't like to make eye contact. It bothers me because to me it feels like they're trying to hide something about themselves. Not something physically, but something spiritually about themselves. I love making eye contact with people because I can read so much about who they are by looking at their eyes, because their eyes are reflecting their soul and their personality within them. Sorry, had to go off on that little side tangent, but I thought y'all would find that interesting. My little spirit girl, of course, is a creature of spirit. Never was human. So it made sense during my travels, and when I started to learn more about the paranormal world, it started to make sense to me why she didn't have eyes, because she was a thing without that never was a soul, never had a soul. She just was she was energy. She was coherent, intelligent energy. Ooh, I went all metaphysical on that one, didn't I? I hope I haven't bored y'all to tears on that. Um, okay. She would always appear during my travels, sometimes guiding me to places she thought I needed to go investigate. Especially, and you're going to hear about this next week. I'm doing a show about fairies in America, and I had I wanted to find out more about fairies when I was traveling about, and I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I had heard about, and I'm not going to give away too much of the story, but I will tell you the name of it. I was at a bar in Knoxville, and and they were telling stories about Dullahan. Um, it was an Irish bar. It was a pub. It was a lot of fun, and everybody in there had wonderful accents. It was so much fun. But they were talking about a Dullahan being loose in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I would have never gone into the bar unless I was walking down the street, off Main Street, and my little spirit girl appeared in front of the bar, and she just pointed straight at the door, which in her not so subtle way, she was telling me to go into the bar. And I think she was helping me, in my information discovery. She wanted me to hear the story of the Dullahan and had me go out looking for the Dullahan. But that's a story for another day, specifically next week when you start hearing about fairies in America. And I talk about the tale of the Dullahan. You guys will really, really like that. Chris, if you're still on here, you probably know what a Dullahan is. Um, Again, it's an Irish story, which it really isn't a story. It's some scary shit. But I'll tell that story next week, and I look forward to telling it. I used to tell my son that story all the time. I used to seriously fuck with my well, I didn't fuck with my son with that story. He always would have me open up like my bestiary or one of my journals, and at night, and have me tell him a story at night from one of those. Can you imagine how twisted my kid is now? He's actually remarkably sane, even though I told him the bedtime stories of the shit that his dad encountered and dealt with back in the day. And when he heard that I was going to tell the story of the Dullahan, he was looking at my journal. When I was looking back over my journal, and I was going to talk about the Dullahan. And he said, "Are you going to tell the story of the Dullahan?" I said, "Yeah." He said that was always his favorite story growing up. Was the stories I would tell him about the Dullahan. He said they would scare me shitless. He said, but I loved them. So It's something for everybody to look forward to. Again, she would always guide me away from danger, or she would guide me towards stuff that I was interested in finding out more about. When I was in New Orleans and Louisiana, she actually guided me um, to Papa Thomas outside of his establishment. He was he still is. He's passed. His body is passed, but he is still with us, walking with us and guiding us still. Um, he was a Haitian refugee, political refugee, I might add, who had to set up shop in New Orleans after um, Papa Doc and Baby Doc were running the show back in the day in Haiti. Duvalier, all those assholes, and he had to flee Haiti and he set up shop there. But she appeared outside of his doorway and to his establishment, to his house of worship, and pointed inside of it. And he stepped outside the door, and he looked at me and he says, "I've been waiting for you. Uh, you and your little friend are welcome to come in." He could fucking see her. He could see her. Papa Thomas could see her. Papa Thomas was and is a very powerful Hongan in the voodoo religion. Well respected by both his parishioners, the community at large, and by the Loa. They loved him and respected him and never failed to give their blessings or to aid him when he needed help. But he could see her, and that started my journey into becoming a Hongan and a voodoo priest and finding myself and finding the religion that was me, that spoke to me for the first time. And I asked him when we went in, I said, "You can see her?" And over the course of the years, he explained to me more of her nature, which is what I've been talking about tonight. Um, that she was a guide, that she was a lonely spirit that stepped out of the ether to be fulfilled with me, as she found a sense of purpose with me, and that I should never deny her or turn her away or ignore her advice. Because she could be incredibly dangerous at the same time. He said it's holding a tiger by its tail, you know. You may sit there and look at tired of you doing that, and it may take a swipe at you. Knock on wood, if it's never happened at this point, but that's how he explained in no certain terms what he felt when he saw her. Um, he called her the child that wasn't a child. He always referred to it as the child that wasn't a child. Um, and he asked me one day that, did she ever tell me her name? And I told him no. He never explained to me why he asked me that question. He just smiled his knowing smile and shook his head and walked out of the room. I hate it when he did that shit. I always knew he knew something I didn't know, or if he knew something I didn't know that he didn't think I should know, he always kept it away from me. I miss that man. I miss that man. Again, I've communed with his spirit on more than one occasion, but I've always left missing him even more every time I've done it. Okay, that's a story for another day. Let's get back on track, because we're starting to run out of time. She's actually aided me in my journey as a Hungan, sometimes as an intermediary between me and the Loa and the divine Loa and the ancestors. She would appear to communicate with them. When I try to communicate spiritually with what you've heard me talk about, the Bigfoot that live in my woods, she actually, I believe, helps set up that bridge, but that spiritual bridge between me and them, um, that she wanted me to communicate with them. There was an instance where I hate bringing this up, but I made a mistake and brought it up to Papa Joey, who's if he's still in the chat or watches this later, with the truth about beer. I told them the story about when they have a couple of haunted dolls. The truth about beer guys, the Suds guys. They amazing site. Y'all really need to go look at their videos. They have amazing videos, but they have a collection of haunted dolls, and one of them, I hate that fucking doll, has an incredibly. I had never cried or felt bad about something before in my life. Um, but the first time that they ever had that damn doll and they were talking about it, and I watched the video, that night that Julie, that's her damn doll's name, Julie, fucking doll. Um, oh, another little girl appeared in a dress similar to what the doll was wearing, appeared in a dream the next night, um, holding hands with that holding hands with my little spirit girl. And she went into, the little girl turned around, the Julie girl, which I assume was Julie, turned around and walked into the barn. Now, the barn in my dreams, or when I spirit walk, the barn I found out, is a representation of death and of the afterlife. And she walked into the barn, and I was following her, and that's when my little spirit guide stood between me and the barn. And this has happened on more than one occasion when I was trying to go into the barn. Stood between me and the barn and says, "This is not for you. This is not for you." Um, when I originally got sick and had to spend a long time in the hospital because my body had gone septic. I had so many fever dreams. Um, I had left my body on several occasions. I had died on the table several times, um, or went so close, or became so close to death that my spiritual self left my body. And she was always in the room when that happened, and would always guide me back to my body and push me back inside of my body, and wouldn't let me go any further. Um, she didn't want me to die. She, as always, insisted it wasn't my time to die. Um, and she's helped keep me alive over the years by doing that, I believe. But spirit guides, they can be like mine. They can be incredibly helpful. Um, Whether that help be temporary or something lifelong. Because I believe that when I do fade from this mortal world, that she's going to continue to walk with me in whatever other spiritual dimension that I intend on walking through and exploring intently, that she will walk with me in that, and continue to teach me in the next life. And if I decide to stay on the wheel, which I will explain one day what I mean by the wheel, but it's like reincarnation, where my soul comes back around and is able to exist again in a mortal shell again. I believe that she will come to that new mortal shell and guide it to adulthood again and never leave me. Um, I think a spirit guide is so intimate and so personal, um, that it can be scary. That it's so personal that you don't become scared of it, but you become scared of what you learn about yourself because of your interactions with that spirit guide and the spirit guide, or well, just keep saying spirit guide, with that spirit guide about what it's helping you learn about yourself. Um, it can be frightening, but that's only for brief moments, and the fear fades, and then the understanding begins afterwards. With that, I want to thank everybody for joining tonight and listening to my conversation. I hope you join me for our next fireside chat, with the paranormal fireside chat with the Naked Bigfoot. Please like or dislike hit the like button, hit the subscribe button here on YouTube if you wish to subscribe, and notification if you receive notifications about future videos, because there will be future videos. If you dislike it, please comment, make a comment, say something in the comments. I have no issue with negative feedback as long as it's constructive and that you're just not being a dick. Um, you can also join me on Twitter, Mike the Naked Bigfoot, and that's at Voodoo3. I will always follow back. I use that platform mainly to entertain and make people laugh, but I also drop little paranormal and supernatural nuggets on there as well. Thanks again, everybody, for turning out. And until we see each other again, have an awesome night. Don't let the spirit bed bugs bite.